A starving German shepherd was trapped beneath the ice, too weak to climb and too frightened to trust. Gideon and his aging canine Mercer reached him before the cold could finish what someone else had begun. But the cut leash around his neck raised a harder question than the rescue itself. What kind of person hears a living creature crying below and still chooses to walk away? As the truth emerged, Gideon was forced to face a moment from his own past that he could never undo. This is a story about responsibility, second chances, and learning to hold on without pulling. Tell us where you're watching from, and please like and subscribe to help us reach 5,000 subscribers and keep these stories coming. The morning light over Frostglass Ridge was too clean to trust. It came down through the Idaho sky in long, pale sheets, turning every pine branch silver and every untouched slope into something almost sacred. The frozen lake below the ridge held the blue of the sky without a ripple. From a distance, the whole country looked harmless. Gideon Thorne knew better than to mistake beauty for safety. He stood beside his truck with one gloved hand resting on the open tailgate, studying the tree line before unloading the rest of his gear. At 57, he still carried the durable build of a man who had spent most of his life lifting, fastening, repairing, and holding things in place. His shoulders were broad beneath a dark navy winter coat reinforced with gray patches, but the rest of him was leaner than people expected from a former Army engineer. His face was long rather than square, marked by a crooked nose that had healed slightly left of center, and deep lines that made him appear stern even when he was only thinking. Wind had pushed his ash-brown hair loose beneath his green wool cap. The beard along his jaw was short, uneven, and more gray than brown in the morning light. Mercer watched him from beside the truck. The German shepherd sat with the patience of an animal who had learned that humans often needed time to catch up with what dogs already understood. His coat was black and honey gold, with a crooked streak of yellow cutting into the dark saddle along his right side. One ear stood straight, the other tilted outward slightly, giving him a permanent look of quiet skepticism. "You planning to supervise all day?" Gideon asked. Mercer blinked. "That what I thought." Gideon reached into the rear of the truck and pulled out a canvas duffel. Beneath it lay a white envelope from a real estate office in Brightwater. The paper inside contained an appraisal, a preliminary listing agreement, and a photograph of Gideon's cabin taken from the road after the first snowfall. A brass key had been taped inside the envelope. The spare key. The kind a man handed to a stranger when he had decided a place no longer belonged to him. Gideon slid the duffel over the envelope before Mercer could see anything, which was foolish. Mercer could not read. But there were moments when the dog's attention felt less like observation and more like judgment. 3 days, Gideon had told himself. 3 quiet days on the ridge. No phone calls except emergencies. No Rowan asking whether he had finally cleaned the old workshop. No Nolan Creed stopping by with county maps and coffee. No neighbors pretending not to know why Gideon had begun stacking boxes in the spare room. 3 days to decide whether leaving Idaho would feel like escape or surrender. He carried the tent toward the clearing. Mercer followed, favoring his right shoulder just enough for Gideon to notice. "You're fine," Gideon said. Mercer gave him a look. "All right, you're old and dramatic." The shepherd moved past him and placed one front paw directly on the folded tent. Gideon stared down. "That's equipment." Mercer did not move. A dry breath escaped Gideon. It was not quite laughter, but it was closer than most sounds he had made in the past week. He crouched, rubbed the dog's neck, and felt the strong warmth beneath the fur. Mercer had been Caleb's idea, not the dog himself. The partnership. Gideon had brought Mercer home from a search and rescue program years earlier, all long legs, oversized paws, and restless intelligence. Gideon had known how to build bridges under pressure, and open roads through debris. He had not known how to raise a dog that noticed every fracture in a room. Caleb Rusk had. Caleb had taught Gideon to stop treating obedience as the same thing as trust. He had taught Mercer to search collapsed structures, ignore machinery, and return to the same hand even when dust and shouting erased everything familiar. Then Caleb had died on a winter road because Gideon had decided there was still time. The memory did not arrive as an image. It arrived as a sound. A phone vibrating against a wooden table. Caleb's voice saying, "Don't rush. I've got it mostly handled." Gideon believing him, because belief had been easier than leaving the warm cabin. He stood too quickly and returned to the truck. By noon, the camp was ready. The tent faced east, away from the stronger wind. A compact stove sat inside a shallow snow trench. Firewood rested beneath a tarp. Gideon checked the satellite communicator twice, tightened a line that did not need tightening, then unpacked the medical kit and repacked it in a different order. Mercer lay near the edge of the clearing, chin on his paws. "You got something to say?" The dog's amber eyes remained fixed on him. Gideon glanced toward the truck, where the envelope still waited beneath the duffel. "Didn't think so." They left the camp after 1 in the afternoon. The trail toward the western edge of Frostglass Ridge had not been maintained since early fall. Snow filled the shallow depressions where hikers' boots had once worn the earth. Young fir branches bent across the path, their needles glittering with ice. Each step produced a clean, compressed sound beneath Gideon's snow boots. Mercer moved ahead, but never far. The shepherd's working years had taught him distance without separation. He would range 20 feet, pause, look back, then continue when Gideon met his eyes. His right stride shortened on steep ground, and Gideon adjusted their pace without commenting. Below them, the frozen lake flashed through the trees. Sunlight scattered across it in hard white fragments. Gideon should have felt calm. Instead, his mind returned to the house. The spare room still held Caleb's old field jacket on a peg behind the door. Gideon had never meant to keep it there. He had only hung it up after the funeral because the closet was full. 2 years later, the jacket remained. Selling the cabin would require taking it down. Perhaps that was what the 3 days were really for. Mercer stopped. Not gradually. One moment he was moving, the next he stood motionless beside a low rise where the wind had stripped the snow thin over black stone. Gideon noticed the change before he understood it. Mercer's head lowered, his ears angled forward. He took 3 careful steps off the trail, sniffed a shallow drift, then circled toward the edge of the ridge. "Mercer?" The dog did not look back. Gideon's hand went automatically to the leash clipped at his belt, though Mercer was not wearing it. He followed, scanning the snow for tracks. There were none he could see, only wind-cut lines and exposed patches of rock. Mercer reached the lip of a narrow break in the ridge and lowered his body until his chest nearly touched the snow. He was not pointing into the woods. He was looking down. Gideon approached slowly. The break was less a cliff than a deep fracture in the stone, concealed by brush and overhanging snow. A dark opening dropped between 2 rock faces, narrow at the top and wider beneath. From the wrong angle, a hiker could pass within 10 feet and never know it was there. Mercer pressed his nose to the edge. Then he made a sound Gideon had not heard in years. Not a bark, not a whine. A low, measured breath pushed through his throat in short intervals, the sound he had once used during training to keep a frightened survivor aware of his presence. Gideon crouched. "What have you got?" Mercer's left ear twitched. At first there was only wind moving through the fracture. Then something scraped below. Faint, uneven, claw against stone. Silence followed. Gideon leaned closer, one hand braced against the frozen ground. The sound came again. 2 weak scratches. Then nothing. Something inside him went cold in a way the air could not explain. Stay. Mercer remained flat as Gideon removed the satellite communicator from his chest harness. He activated the emergency channel and gave his coordinates, terrain description, and a brief assessment. A woman answered after several seconds of static. Frostglass Mountain Rescue, this is Tessa Rourke. Gideon knew the name, though they had met only twice. Tessa was the kind of rescue leader people described as blunt when they meant competent. I've got a live animal below a rock fracture, Gideon said. Approximately 30 feet down, narrow shelf, unknown injuries. Can you identify the animal? Dog, shepherd type. Do not descend alone. Gideon looked at Mercer. I heard you. That is not the same as agreeing. He almost smiled. How far out? 45 minutes if the lower access road stays open, maybe an hour. Weather is stable, but the western shade is icing over. Gideon studied the fracture. I can lower heat and fluids. Do that. Nothing more until we arrive. The line clicked off. Gideon unpacked the emergency cord from his bag. He secured a thermal pouch, a folded heat blanket, and a small bottle of electrolyte solution inside a padded sleeve. The opening was too narrow to lower them straight. He had to crawl along the edge until he found a gap between brush and stone. Mercer moved with him, still making those quiet, steady sounds. Keep talking, Gideon murmured. The dog did. Gideon lowered the bundle. 10 feet. 20. The cord shifted against rock. At nearly 30 feet, the thermal pouch struck something solid and stopped. Gideon angled his head and caught a glimpse below. A dog lay on a narrow ledge, its body folded against the cliff, as though the mountain had tried to close around it. Black and dark gold fur had frozen into jagged clumps. Its ribs showed beneath the coat. One rear leg trembled without bearing weight. Around its neck was a gray nylon collar and a length of severed cord. The dog lifted its head, its lips pulled back weakly. Even exhausted, it was prepared to defend the last few inches of ground it possessed. Easy, Gideon said. The animal's eyes caught the light, one dark brown, the other ringed faintly with amber. The head dropped again. Mercer's next sound was softer. The dog below answered with a breath so thin Gideon nearly missed it. For one suspended moment, the ridge seemed to hold 3 separate lives in the same silence. One man kneeling above an old failure, one aging shepherd refusing to leave the edge, and one starving animal that no longer had the strength to decide whether help was another kind of danger. Gideon checked the time. 11 minutes since the call. Too long. Not long enough to justify what he was considering. He studied the nearest trees, tested the snowpack with his pole, and inspected the rock lip. His old training returned in pieces: load direction, redundancy, edge protection, failure points. Tessa's voice remained in his head. Do not descend alone. Caleb's voice came after it. Don't rush. I've got it mostly handled. The dog below moved once, then its head rolled toward the ice. Gideon made the decision. He built 2 anchor points around separate trees, padded the rope where it crossed stone, and clipped into his harness. Mercer rose. No! The dog stepped between Gideon and the edge. Gideon placed a gloved hand against Mercer's chest. I'm not going down to bring him up. I'm going down to keep him alive. Mercer held his gaze. For a moment, Gideon saw not defiance, but fear. The dog remembered too. Not Caleb's death as Gideon remembered it, perhaps, but the empty chair afterward. The coat behind the door. The weeks when Gideon had moved through the house without speaking. I'm coming back, Gideon said. It sounded like a promise made too late. Mercer finally stepped aside. Gideon descended slowly. The cold intensified inside the fracture. Sunlight vanished after the first 10 feet, replaced by blue shadow and the smell of stone, wet fur, and blood. When his boots reached the ledge, the trapped dog raised its head and showed its teeth again. "I know," Gideon whispered. "I wouldn't trust me either." He did not touch it immediately. He secured himself, shifted the thermal pouch closer, then waited until the dog's breathing eased by half a measure. Above, Mercer continued the low, steady call. The animal's ear moved. Gideon wrapped the heat blanket around its body without pulling the injured leg. The dog flinched but did not bite. Its skin beneath the fur felt frighteningly cold. He supported its head with one hand, keeping the muzzle away from the ice. "You don't have to do anything," he said. "Just stay." The words were meant for the dog. They were also meant for himself. Tessa's team arrived 43 minutes after the original call. Her voice came from above before her face appeared. "Thorne, tell me you're secured." "Double anchor." "Tell me you didn't improvise the whole thing from a hardware store receipt." "Only half." "Good. I dislike ambitious men." When Tessa leaned over the edge, Gideon saw a compact woman in an orange and black rescue shell, white helmet, and amber goggles. A streak of silver showed at her right temple beneath the helmet strap. She assessed the anchors, the ledge, and Gideon in one quick sweep. 2 rescuers established a haul system. Tessa descended part way to guide a flexible animal litter into place. Together, they moved the dog by inches. It gave one low growl when the litter tightened around its body. Mercer answered from above. The growl stopped. By the time the dog reached the ridge, afternoon had begun to collapse into early winter dusk. The sky remained clear, but the sun had slipped behind the pines, draining color from the snow. Gideon climbed last. When he pulled himself over the edge, Mercer pressed his nose hard against Gideon's wrist, then planted one paw on his boot. "I said I was coming back." Mercer did not look convinced. Tessa knelt beside the litter. Her movements were quick but controlled. She checked the dog's gums, breathing, and leg position, then looked toward the path. "We move, now." One of the rescuers lifted the rear handles. Mercer took position beside the litter without command. As they started down, Tessa remained behind for less than a minute to inspect the ground near the fracture. She returned carrying 3 things: a short length of leash caught in a snow-buried bush, a torn strip of orange reflective material, and a detail she did not need to hold: a broad slide mark leading toward the edge, partially covered by new snow. She handed the leash to Gideon. The cut was clean. Not torn by stone, not chewed through. Cut. Gideon looked at the starving dog on the litter. Around its neck, the remaining gray nylon had been severed at the same angle. Someone had stood near that fracture with a blade. Someone had watched the line go slack. He closed his fist around the frozen leash. Ahead of him, Mercer walked close enough that his shoulder brushed the side of the litter every few steps. Gideon followed them into the deepening blue of the forest. He had come to Frostglass Ridge to decide whether he could leave his old life behind. Instead, beneath the ice, he had found a life that someone else already had. And the sound of its claws against stone had awakened the echo of a phone call he had answered too late. This time, at least, he had gone down. By the time they reached Brightwater, the last clean light had drained out of the snow. The town appeared gradually through the windshield, a gas station glowing at the intersection, a row of dark storefronts, the old grain elevator standing beyond them like a tall gray witness. Snow had begun falling again, not heavily, but steadily enough to soften road signs and collect along the edges of parked cars. Gideon drove behind the rescue vehicle with both hands fixed on the wheel. Mercer stood in the rear seat, braced against the turns. He had refused to lie down. Through the windshield ahead, The red lights of Tessa's truck shifted across the road, disappeared behind drifting snow, then returned. The dog on the litter had not made another sound. That silence felt worse than the scratching beneath the ridge. Rowan Pike's clinic sat at the eastern edge of Brightwater, beyond the hardware store and a church whose white steeple vanished into the night. The building was low and practical, built from pale brick with a covered side entrance wide enough for animal transport. The rescue team had barely stopped before the side door opened. A woman stepped into the cold wearing a plum-colored waterproof coat over dark medical scrubs. Her brown-red hair, threaded with silver at the temples, had been braided low over one shoulder. She took in the litter, the frost crusted on the dog's coat, and the severed line at its neck without asking for a summary first. "Treatment room 2, she said, slow and level. Her voice was calm, but not gentle in the decorative way people sometimes used around injured animals. It was the calm of someone who expected every person near her to become useful. Tessa and one of her rescuers carried the litter inside. Gideon followed until Rowan stopped him with one raised hand. "You can come in when I know whether he'll try to bite through fear or pain. He's barely conscious. That has never stopped a frightened shepherd." She turned to Mercer. The old dog had entered without waiting for permission and stood just inside the doorway, snow melting from his paws. Rowan looked at Gideon. "Yours?" "Mostly." That answer usually means the dog is better trained than the man. Tessa gave a tired sound that might have been agreement. Rowan pointed toward the wall. "Keep him there for now." Gideon led Mercer aside. The treatment room door remained open for only a few seconds. He saw Rowan cut away frozen fur near the injured rear leg, check the dog's gums, then slide a stethoscope beneath the thermal blanket. A veterinary technician moved around her with practiced speed, preparing warmed fluids and a padded mask. Then the door shut. The sound was ordinary. The dog inside exploded against it. A hard impact struck the lower panel. Metal rattled. Someone called for another blanket. A second crash followed, then the scrape of claws against flooring. Mercer went rigid. Gideon felt the leash tighten in his hand. "Easy." Mercer did not pull toward the door. Instead, he lowered his body and stared at the narrow gap beneath it. The noises stopped abruptly. A moment later, Rowan opened the door a few inches. "He woke up faster than expected." "How bad?" "Bad enough that guessing won't help." She looked at Mercer, then at the hall. "Bring your dog closer, but keep him out of the room." Gideon walked Mercer forward. Rowan left the door open no more than 6 inches. Through the gap, the injured shepherd was visible on a padded mat. One foreleg had been shaved for a catheter. His chest moved too quickly. His body was angled toward the far corner, every muscle tense despite exhaustion. Mercer approached until he was several feet away. Then he turned around. He lay down with his back to the opening. Rowan's gaze shifted to Gideon. "Did you teach him that?" "No." Inside the room, the injured dog continued panting. Mercer placed his head between his paws. The breaths behind the door gradually lengthened. Not much, enough. Rowan closed the door quietly. "Leave him there," she said. Gideon looked down at Mercer. The dog's tilted left ear remained aimed toward the treatment room. "Apparently," Rowan added, "he has better bedside instincts than most of my staff." The technician passing behind her said, "I heard that." "You were meant to." For the next hour, Gideon waited beneath fluorescent lights that made everyone look more tired than they felt. Tessa stayed long enough to transfer the rescue notes and GPS coordinates. Before leaving, she placed a clear evidence pouch on the empty chair beside Gideon. Inside were the severed leash, the strip of orange reflective fabric, and printed labels marking where each had been found. "I sent the site photographs to Nolan," she said. There was something else. Gideon looked up. A small oil mark near the turnout. fresh enough that the snow hadn't absorbed all of it. Could be from any old truck. But you don't think it was. I think winter preserves some things and hides others. That makes people overconfident. She adjusted the copper-colored carabiner clipped to her rescue harness. Don't decide what happened before the evidence does. I know. Tessa studied him for one beat longer than necessary. You knew not to descend alone, too. Then she left. The evidence pouch remained on the chair between Gideon and the wall. He did not touch it. At last, Rowan returned without her coat. Under the clinic lights, she looked smaller than she had outside, though no less commanding. She wore a blue-gray scrub top over a wine-colored long-sleeve shirt. A dark red fountain pen was clipped near her collar. He's stable enough for the next few hours, she said. Gideon stood. That doesn't mean safe. His core temperature is improving. He's dehydrated, underweight, and his blood work suggests he has been underfed for weeks, not days. She opened the chart. There's muscle strain in the left rear leg, possibly from falling or repeated attempts to climb. No obvious fracture. His nails are split and worn. He also has scarring around the neck, consistent with long-term restraint. Wire? Could be cable, could be a narrow collar, could be repeated pulling. I'm not going to invent a history from scar tissue. Gideon glanced toward the treatment room. He ate? No, and he won't be given a full meal. He needs food. He needs not to die from being fed too quickly. She explained the risk of refeeding syndrome in precise, unsentimental terms. A body starved long enough could fail when nutrition returned too aggressively. Electrolytes could shift. The heart could become unstable. The very thing that looked like rescue could become another injury. Gideon disliked the logic because it was sound. How long? Days before I trust him. Weeks before he resembles healthy. Rowan turned the chart around. Attached to the top was a photograph of the dog's collar buckle. 3 worn letters had been stamped into the metal. NPRR. You recognize it? Gideon asked. I do. She rested one hand on the counter. Northpiss Animal Recovery. They operated north of here until 2 years ago. A shelter? A rescue network. Started small. Took difficult cases other groups avoided. Senior dogs, bite histories, animals from closed breeding operations. What happened? Too many animals, not enough documentation, housing violations, transport records missing or inconsistent. Then part of the facility failed during a winter storm. Her tone changed only slightly, but enough to show that she had not learned the story from a newspaper. You worked with them. For 6 months. And good intentions stopped being enough long before the people involved were willing to admit it. She reached into a cabinet, removed a handheld scanner, and passed it slowly over the dog's shoulder and neck. No microchip, she said. Nothing registered. Could the collar be old? It could. NorthPass used hundreds of them. Equipment gets reused, donated, sold, stolen. The buckle proves very little by itself. She glanced at Gideon. But it proves the dog passed through someone's hands. The treatment room door opened at the far end of the hall as the technician carried out a tray. The hinge squeaked. Inside, the injured dog slammed against the padded barrier. Mercer rose immediately. Not barking. Not advancing. He walked to the threshold and sat sideways, avoiding direct eye contact. The shepherd inside froze. For several seconds, neither dog moved. Then the injured animal lowered himself inch by inch until his chest touched the blanket. Rowan watched from behind Gideon. He doesn't trust the doorway, she said. Gideon looked at the dog's body pressed as far from the opening as the room allowed. He doesn't trust what comes through it. or where it leads. Rowan moved to close the door, but stopped before the latch caught. She left it resting against the frame without letting the metal click. The dog remained down. "What are you calling him?" Gideon asked. "I'm not." "You need something for the chart, then pick one." He frowned. "Why me?" "You went into a hole for him." "That doesn't make him mine." "No, but it makes you the first person here who knows what sound he makes when he wants to live." Gideon looked through the narrow opening. The dog's eyes were open but unfocused. His coat had begun to dry, revealing darker fur along his back and a pale, uneven triangle across his chest. Outside, snow brushed the clinic windows. "Morrow," Gideon said. Rowan waited. "Why?" "Because he made it to the next day." She wrote the name on the chart with the dark red pen. Morrow. The ink looked too clean for the animal it described. Near midnight, Nolan Creed arrived carrying cold air and a folded county map. The ranger was shorter than Gideon and broader through the waist, with a heavy brown-gray mustache and eyes narrowed by years of sun glare off snow. He removed his olive jacket, stamped slush from his boots, and nodded once toward Mercer. "He's still pretending retirement is optional?" Mercer ignored him. "That's a yes," Nolan said. He took Gideon's statement at a small table near the reception desk. He asked for times, distances, decisions, and exact wording. He did not ask how Gideon felt when he saw the cut line. Nolan had worked enough emergencies to know feelings became less reliable when asked to perform on command. When they finished, he closed the dark blue field notebook. "The fracture is on federal land," he said. "That gives me the site, the vehicle access, and whatever happened along the trail." "And the dog?" "Animal control has jurisdiction once we know where he came from. I'll contact Marisol Keene in the morning." "Could this be North Pass?" "Could be. Could also be someone using an old collar." Nolan tapped the evidence pouch. "This tells us somebody may have been there. It doesn't tell us why." "The line was cut." "Yes. And the dog was left below." "Yes." Gideon leaned back. Nolan's expression stayed level. "That's not me disagreeing with you. That's me refusing to name the person before we find them." Gideon looked toward the treatment room. "I wasn't naming anyone." Not out loud. Nolan had known him too long. After he left, the clinic settled into its overnight rhythm. The receptionist lights were dimmed. The coffee in the staff room grew bitter on the warmer. Somewhere behind the closed doors, a small dog whined in its sleep, and a monitor gave a soft electronic pulse. Gideon stood. "Come on," he told Mercer. "We're going back." Mercer did not move. The dog lay outside Morrow's room, one paw stretched toward the gap beneath the door. Gideon picked up the leash. "Mercer?" One amber eye turned toward him. "We've done what we can." Mercer looked at the door. Gideon felt irritation rise first because irritation was easier than recognizing the accusation. "This isn't our case." Mercer lowered his head again. Gideon stared at him. In another life, Mercer had followed commands through smoke, unstable flooring, and the noise of machinery. Now he was choosing disobedience with complete stillness. Gideon sat back down. The chair protested beneath him. "All right," he said quietly. 1 hour. Mercer closed his eyes. The hour passed, then another. Each time someone opened the metal door at the far end of the corridor, Morrow shifted violently in the isolation room. Not enough to injure himself now. Rowan had replaced the hard fixtures with padded barriers. Still, the scrape of his body against the floor reached Gideon every time. The sound began carrying him backward. Not to the ridge. To the cabin kitchen 2 years earlier. The phone had vibrated near a mug of cooling coffee. Caleb's name had glowed across the screen. Gideon had answered on the 4th ring. Caleb had spoken too calmly. That was what Gideon remembered now, the false steadiness of a man trying not to make another man afraid. Truck went over near Hollow Creek. Got one civilian with me, legs bad, radio's cutting out. Gideon had looked through the window at the snow. How bad? Manageable. Don't kill yourself getting here. So Gideon had waited for the plow. 23 minutes, a reasonable decision, according to the report. A fatal one, according to every night afterward. From behind the clinic door came a dull movement. Gideon's hands tightened around one another. You keep thinking staying changes the past, Rowan said. He had not heard her approach. She stood near the reception counter holding 2 paper cups. She handed him one. It doesn't, Gideon said. No. She sat opposite him. But leaving doesn't prove you've accepted it. He looked at her sharply. Rowan drank her coffee. I knew Caleb. That stopped him. Not well. He brought Mercer in once after a training injury. Talked too much. Thought every room needed improving. That sounds like him. He said you were very reliable. Gideon looked down at the untouched coffee. He was wrong once. Most people are. The answer was not kind enough to be comforting. That made it useful. Near 3 in the morning, Rowan brought out an old laptop and began checking archived intake records from North Pass and the facilities that had received its dogs after closure. Gideon watched names, identification numbers, photographs, and transfer dates move across the screen. Morrow did not appear. Rowan searched again using coat color, sex, estimated age, and medical history. Nothing. That collar came from North Pass, she said. It was put on him after the official operation ended, or someone reused the equipment elsewhere. So the mark leads nowhere. It leads somewhere, just not where you want yet. At 4:17, Gideon stepped outside. The snow had stopped. Brightwater lay silent beneath a white crust. Every roof and parked car softened into unfamiliar shapes. He took out his phone. The real estate agent answered on the 5th ring with the alarmed voice of someone expecting bad news before dawn. Mr. Thorne? This is Gideon. I know. Is everything all right? He looked through the clinic window. Mercer was still lying beside the isolation room door. No. A pause. Do you need to reschedule the final appraisal? Yes. For when? Gideon watched Rowan move quietly across the hall and leave the door to Morrow's room unlatched. I don't know. The agent hesitated. You still planning to list the cabin? Gideon could have answered. The envelope remained beneath the duffel in his truck. The spare key was still taped inside. Nothing official had changed. But through the glass, Mercer raised his head as Morrow shifted behind the door. I need more time, Gideon said. He ended the call before the woman could ask how much. For the first time in months, uncertainty did not feel like failure. It felt like staying. Snowcap Valley lay north of Brightwater beyond a road that narrowed each mile, as though reconsidering whether it wanted visitors. The morning was clear, but yesterday's snow still clung to the pines in thick white shelves. Frost brightened the wire fences around empty pastures. Farther up the valley, mountains crowded the horizon, their lower slopes dark with timber and their peaks washed pale by winter sun. Gideon drove behind Nolan's Ranger vehicle. Mercer sat in the passenger seat instead of the rear. His body faced forward, but his head turned occasionally toward Gideon, measuring the quiet inside the truck. The real estate envelope was still under the canvas duffel. Gideon had not moved it. That felt less like a decision than an object he was refusing to touch. His phone buzzed in the cup holder. Rowan had sent a morning update from the clinic. Morrow kept down the first controlled feeding, temperature stable, still reactive to metal doors. Below it was a photograph. Morrow lay on a gray blanket, thin head resting near the soft barrier. Mercer's absence had left the space outside the room empty, but someone had placed a rolled towel there where he usually slept. Gideon studied the image until Nolan's brake lights appeared ahead. "Not our job today," he said. Mercer looked at the phone. "I know what that look means." The shepherd turned toward the windshield again. They met the others at a snow-covered turnout near the entrance to Snowcap Valley. Tessa Rourke stood beside her rescue truck, checking a folder against the license plates in the lot. Without her helmet, her short black hair curved around her jaw, the silver streak at her right temple visible beneath a copper-colored knit cap. The scratched carabiner from her rescue harness now hung from the zipper of her orange-brown winter jacket. Rowan arrived next in an older dark wagon carrying 2 medical cases and enough bottled water to suggest she distrusted every property beyond town limits. The final vehicle belonged to Marisol Keene. She stepped out wearing a dark blue-gray field coat, black turtleneck, and heavy brown boots. She was shorter than Gideon, full-figured, and held herself with such deliberate stillness that the others naturally stopped moving when she approached. Her black hair, threaded with silver, was gathered in a low knot. Square tortoiseshell glasses hung from a cord at her chest. Marisol did not offer her hand. "You're Gideon Thorne." "Yes, and this is Mercer." The dog watched her. "I read Nolan's report," she continued. "You found the animal. You helped stabilize it. That does not make you an investigator." "I didn't say it did." "Good. Then we have saved time." Nolan hid something inside his mustache. Marisol opened a leather document case and removed several pages. "We have consent to inspect the former North Pass structures and the public access portions of the property. We do not search private living quarters without permission or additional authority. We document what is visible. We do not decide what a person intended because a room looks sad." Her gaze moved briefly to Gideon. "People who harm animals often call themselves rescuers. So do people who genuinely rescue animals and eventually convince themselves that rules are for less caring people. Both can leave suffering behind." Rowan zipped her coat higher. "That speech usually make friends?" "It prevents misunderstandings." They continued into the valley. The old North Pass property appeared after another mile, where a weathered sign leaned beside a split-rail fence. Most of the lettering had peeled away, but a faded outline remained, the profile of a dog beneath 2 mountain peaks. The main building had once been a dairy barn. Its roof sagged over one end. Half the exterior kennels had been removed, leaving rectangular scars in the snow and rows of rusted bolts along a concrete pad. Nothing barked when they arrived. The silence was not peaceful. It was vacant. Nolan parked near the gate. Tessa photographed tire marks before anyone walked through them. Marisol logged the time and weather in a small black notebook. Gideon clipped Mercer's leash on, though the dog showed no urge to range ahead. A narrow drainage channel ran along the old kennel foundations. Gideon crouched to inspect it. "Built with a proper grade," he said. Rowan glanced down. "They spent money here once." The isolation wing remained attached to the barn. Its door hung crooked, but inside, 3 small rooms still had washable walls, floor drains, and ventilation grates. This was not what Gideon had expected. He had imagined stacked cages, filth hardened in corners, and the unmistakable smell of long neglect. Instead, the place looked like something that had once worked. A place that had failed afterward. Tessa crossed the concrete pad toward a dented steel barrel near the fence. "Burn pit," she called. The barrel contained blackened paper, melted plastic tabs, and several twisted metal clips. Snow had blown into the top. The ash looked old, compacted through more than one season. Marisol photographed it. "Could be routine disposal," Nolan said. "Could be," she answered. Rowan opened an exterior trash bin and moved aside a torn feed sack. "This isn't old." She lifted an empty amber vial inside a clear bag. The label identified a common veterinary anti-inflammatory medication. The expiration date had not passed. Marisol adjusted her glasses. "Available through clinics and farm suppliers?" "Prescription in this formulation." "Can you date its use?" "No. Only say someone emptied it recently enough that the label hasn't weathered." Gideon saw a blue plastic bowl beside the rear wall. A crescent of water remained inside. Ice had begun forming around the edge, but the center was still liquid. Mercer approached, sniffed once, then moved toward a line of hooks beneath an awning. 3 nylon leads hung there, clean and damp. The property was empty. Someone was still washing leashes. A door opened across the yard. The man who emerged from the small caretaker's house wore an old beige coat over a red brick flannel shirt. He was thin, with sloping shoulders and white hair long enough to brush his collar. His narrow face seemed assembled from tired angles. Hollow cheeks, long nose, pale blue eyes shadowed by lack of sleep. A chain of keys hung from his belt. It made a soft metallic sound each time he walked. "You could have called," he said. Marisol stopped several feet from him. "We did." "My phone doesn't work right in the valley." Nolan lifted his chin toward the house. "Landline?" "Disconnected." The man looked past them and found Rowan. Recognition hardened his face. "Dr. Pike." "Dale." So this was Dale Huxley. He had once run North Pass Animal Recovery. In Rowan's description, Gideon had pictured a charismatic man who could fill a donor room with stories and guilt. The person before him looked more like someone who had been worn thin by feeding things that never stopped needing him. Dale's gaze dropped to Mercer. The shepherd did not tense. Dale held out the back of one hand, not reaching farther than the leash allowed. Mercer stepped close enough to smell him. For a second, Dale's expression changed. The lines around his mouth loosened. He did not pet the dog. He waited. Mercer backed away and returned to Gideon's side. No growl, no warning, no verdict. Gideon was unexpectedly grateful for that. Marisol showed Dale a photograph of Morrow's collar buckle. "Do you recognize this marking?" Dale looked at it once. "Yes." "NPAR? North Pass Animal Recovery. You operated under that name." "For 11 years. "Are you operating now?" "No." His answer came too quickly to be useful. Rowan watched him. Dale noticed. "What?" "You always rubbed your thumb against your keys when you were lying." Dale's hand stopped. The key ring went still. "That isn't evidence," he said. "No, it's history." Marisol stepped between the old disagreement before it could find momentum. "The collar was found on a severely malnourished dog recovered from Frostglass Ridge. No chip, no current record. The equipment appears to have originated here. We donated boxes of collars when we closed." "To whom?" "Shelters, foster groups, whoever would take them." "Do you have a distribution list?" Dale looked toward the empty kennels. "No." "Transfer receipts?" "No." "Records of destruction or remaining inventory?" His mouth tightened. "No." A gust moved through the yard and rattled a loose sheet of roofing. Dale pulled his coat closer. "North Pass is gone," he said. "You can walk through every room. You won't find animals here." "That was not the question," Marisol replied. Dale's eyes shifted toward Gideon. "You found the dog?" "Yes." "Alive?" "For now." Dale absorbed the answer without visible relief. That absence bothered Gideon until he realized relief might have revealed too much. "What happened to this place?" Gideon asked. Marisol turned slightly but did not stop him. Dale looked at the barn. "The north kennel roof came down during a storm. Wet snow, bad timber, worse luck. We had 37 dogs on site and 6 in foster homes. How many died? Gideon asked. Dale's thumb found the keys again. 4. The wind seemed louder after that. We moved the survivors, Dale continued. Some to regional shelters, some to private fosters. Insurance refused most of the claim because the county said our occupancy paperwork wasn't current. Donors pulled out when the inspection report became public. Everyone loves difficult dogs until the difficult part costs money. Rowan's voice remained level. You had more animals than your permit allowed. We had animals nobody else would take. You had no overnight staffing during part of that winter, because the grant was delayed. You transferred dogs without complete medical records, because 3 facilities said they would euthanize them if we waited. Dale's eyes sharpened with each answer. He was not ashamed of the facts. He was angry that anyone believed circumstances could be separated from them. Gideon had known men like that. Men whose reasons had once been valid enough to save lives, then became so familiar they no longer recognized when a reason turned into permission. Dale looked toward the old kennels. You want cruelty? Go inspect the places that refused them. Go ask how many old shepherds with bite histories made it past intake. We kept them alive. And 4 died here, Rowan said. Dale faced her. Yes. There was no defense in the word. That made it harder. Marisol closed the photograph folder. Are you currently housing animals on this property, or any adjacent location under your control? No. Rowan bent to retrieve a damp leash from the hook. This was washed recently. Dale's jaw shifted. Could have been left in snow. There's soap residue in the weave. That I washed an old leash. For what? I don't remember. Marisol walked to the water bowl. And this? Stray dogs passed through. In winter? Yes. To an empty facility with no food visible and a locked gate? Dale did not answer. The quiet changed shape. Until then, Gideon had felt they were examining the remains of a failed rescue. Now the property seemed less empty than concealed. A diesel engine sounded on the road beyond the trees. Mercer stood. The movement was immediate but controlled, his ears angled toward the noise, his nose lifted. Dale turned toward the western ridge, not toward the road, toward the woods behind the property. It lasted only a second, but Tessa saw it. She moved away from the group, following the line of his gaze. Beyond the rear fence, 2 fresh tire tracks curved through a gap between fir trees and continued toward a low hill. Where does that service road go? She asked. Dale's answer came after too much silence. Old forest nursery. Still in use? No. When was the road last cleared? It wasn't. Tessa crouched and brushed loose snow from the track. The grooves were sharply defined. Snow had been compressed within the last day. This wasn't made by weather. Dale stepped toward her. That route isn't part of the North Pass structures. Marisol looked up from her notebook. Is it on land you lease or control? The nursery belongs to the Forest Service. Do you have access? No. The keys at his belt struck one another. A single dog barked somewhere beyond the hill. The sound was distant, muffled by timber and snow. Everyone heard it. Dale's face emptied. A second bark answered. Then silence. Mercer took one step toward the service road. Gideon shortened the leash. The shepherd looked up at him, not demanding release, simply confirming that the sound was real. Dale moved between Tessa and the gap in the fence. There are houses beyond that ridge. Nolan unfolded the local parcel map. No houses within 2 miles. Could be hunters. Seasons closed. People ignore seasons. Marisol approached Dale until only a few feet separated them. Step aside. You don't have authority to search that nursery. Not without consent or a warrant, no. Dale's shoulders lowered slightly, believing he had found safety in the boundary. Marisol continued. but I have enough to document recent animal care materials on a supposedly inactive property, fresh vehicle access to an adjacent abandoned facility, inconsistent answers, and audible dogs in a location with no registered kennel. She removed her glasses and folded them carefully. I can leave now and request a warrant. Dale said nothing. I do that, Marisol went on. The application will include possible concealment of animals, incomplete veterinary oversight, and interference with an active inquiry involving an injured dog recovered from public land. I didn't put that dog on the ridge. I did not say you did. You're treating me like I did. I'm treating you like a man who has lied 3 times in 15 minutes. Dale looked at Rowan. There was old anger there, but something else beneath it, an exhausted appeal to the person who had once understood why North Pass existed. Rowan did not rescue him from the moment. Tell her, she said. Dale's hand closed around the keys. The chain disappeared inside his fist. For several breaths, the yard held only winter sounds, wind under metal roofing, branches rubbing together, Mercer's quiet breathing beside Gideon. Then Dale looked toward the tire tracks. There are 11, he said. Marisol's expression did not change. 11 what? Dogs. Where? At the nursery. Under whose care? Mine. Registered with the county? No. Veterinary records? Some. Intake records? Not complete. Dale's voice grew rough. They are fed, they are warm, none of them came from the ridge. That is not yet something you get to declare, Marisol said. Dale's pale eyes flashed. You take them out of there today, 3 won't make the transfer. 2 are old enough that a shelter floor will finish them. 1 bites when men reach over his head. Another has seizures when crated. You move them because a form says move, and you'll call whatever happens procedure. Marisol held his gaze. And you kept them secret because you believed only you were qualified to decide what risk they should live with. Dale looked away first. The keys began to tremble in his hand. Gideon glanced down at Mercer. The dog was watching Dale, but his body remained beside Gideon's leg. No hostility, no trust, only attention. That felt more honest than any judgment Gideon could have made. Dale had lied. The evidence of recent care was real. The hidden dogs were real. So was the fear in his voice when he described what might happen to them. The question had changed. They were no longer standing in the ruins of a rescue that had failed. They were standing at the edge of one that had refused to end. And Gideon could not yet tell whether Dale Huxley was concealing cruelty or protecting compassion that had grown dangerous because no one was allowed to question it. The abandoned Forest Service nursery stood beyond the western ridge, hidden by a wall of pines and a service road that had nearly disappeared beneath fresh snow. Dale walked ahead of the group with his keys clenched in one fist. No one spoke during the first few minutes. The road curved between rows of dead saplings planted decades earlier in careful government lines. Their narrow trunks rose from the snow like gray stakes. Farther on, the trees opened around a low cluster of buildings, an insulated storage shed, a long greenhouse with clouded panels, and a propane tank half buried beside a loading ramp. The place did not look secret in the dramatic sense. There were no fences topped with wire, no warning signs, no locked gates heavy enough to imply guilt. It looked forgotten rather than hidden, which Gideon suspected had been useful to Dale. Tessa stopped near the first tire track and photographed the road before the others passed over it. Marisol remained beside Dale. You are consenting to an inspection of the buildings and animals under your control, she said. Dale's face tightened. Yes. I need you to say it clearly. I consent. And you understand that consent can be withdrawn, but if I identify immediate danger, I may take emergency action within my authority. I understand. The chain of keys trembled softly as he unlocked the warehouse. Warm air escaped through the opening. So did barking. Not a single explosive wall of sound, but separate voices layered over one another, deep, sharp, hoarse, frightened. Some dogs moved toward the sound of people. Others retreated. Mercer stood close to Gideon's left leg. The old shepherd did not pull toward the building. His nose worked steadily, sorting the air. Inside, temporary kennels had been arranged in 2 rows beneath hanging industrial lights. The concrete floor had been covered in rubber mats. Propane heaters warmed the central aisle. Clean blankets filled several raised beds, and steel bowls sat clipped to kennel doors. The first dog Gideon saw was an elderly black Labrador whose muzzle had gone almost entirely white. One rear leg ended above the ankle. The dog watched them with patient brown eyes, but did not rise. Across from him, a brindled mastiff mix paced 3 steps in one direction and 3 steps back. A handwritten card on the kennel read, "Mabel, do not reach overhead, use side door." Farther down, a small cattle dog wore a padded helmet to protect her during seizures. These were not animals someone had collected because they were easy to love. Dale moved among them differently than he moved among people. His shoulders lowered. His voice lost its defensive edge. "Morning, Ruthie." A thin hound lifted her head. "Easy, Jasper." A scarred shepherd stopped circling when Dale touched 2 fingers to the kennel frame. The dogs knew him. That did not prove the place was safe. It only proved he had been here often enough to become part of their world. Marisol began at the first enclosure with a clipboard and a yellow cloth measuring tape. She checked floor space, water access, kennel spacing, and ventilation. Rowan followed with gloves and a medical case, reading Dale's handwritten cards. Tessa inspected the building itself. Gideon stayed near the center aisle with Mercer. The warehouse had been adapted with care, but not with enough money. Extension cords crossed beneath rubber covers. Plastic bins of food were stacked away from the damp, yet 2 had cracked lids. A propane line had been repaired with newer fittings, though no inspection sticker was visible. At the rear wall stood 4 transport crates. None was secured to the floor. Tessa pushed one lightly. It shifted several inches. "In a hard stop, these become projectiles," she said. Dale looked over. "We brace them during transport." "With what?" "Cargo straps." "Rated straps?" His silence answered. Rowan opened a metal cabinet. Medication bottles, syringes, and bandages occupied 3 shelves. Some were labeled by animal name. Others had only dosage instructions written in marker. "This should be locked," she said. "It is, usually. The key is in the lock, so volunteers can reach it. That is why it should not be." Dale rubbed his thumb across the keys at his belt. "We have never had a medication error." "That you recorded," Rowan replied. Marisol looked up from her inspection. "How many people work here?" 3 regularly, 2 others when needed." "Overnight coverage?" "Not every night." "How often is the building left unattended?" 4 or 5 hours at most." "What happens if the heater fails?" "There's a temperature alarm." "Who receives it?" "I do." "And if you are asleep, without service, or unable to respond?" Dale gestured toward the propane unit. "It has not failed." Marisol's expression did not change. "That was not the question." They moved through the kennels one by one, 11 dogs. Every one of them had a name. Not everyone had a complete history. 3 files contained intake dates but no surrender forms. 2 had copies of veterinary records without source information. 1 file listed only a county, an approximate age, and the words "owner" disappeared. The dogs had been fed. Most were under veterinary care of some kind. None appeared recently starved. Yet care existed beside risk everywhere Gideon looked. A fire extinguisher had expired the previous year. The rear exit opened inward and had a storage cart partially blocking it. The greenhouse used for daytime exercise was warmer in sunlight but had cracked lower panels covered with plywood. There was no true isolation room, only a kennel at the far end separated by hanging plastic sheeting. Rowan stopped there. A young mixed-breed dog lay curled beneath a blanket, eyes watering. "How long has he been coughing?" "2 days," Dale said. "And he shares air with the others. He is separated by plastic. We had nowhere else." Rowan removed her stethoscope. "That sentence is doing too much work." Dale flinched as though she had struck him. Gideon watched the two of them. There was history in the way Rowan spoke to Dale. Not contempt, but disappointment worn smooth by repetition. Marisol finished her first pass and stood in the center aisle. "These dogs are not being deliberately starved or beaten," she said. "I see no immediate evidence of intentional cruelty." Dale lifted his chin slightly. She continued. "I also see no compliant quarantine area, no reliable overnight staffing, unsafe medication access, unsecured transport equipment, incomplete intake records, inadequate emergency planning, and structural hazards." The small rise in Dale's posture disappeared. "You came looking for a monster," he said. "You did not find one. I came looking for risk. You found old equipment and poor people improvising. I found animals whose survival depends on a system built around one man's judgment." Dale looked toward the kennels. "They would be dead without my judgment." Marisol's voice remained quiet. "That does not make your judgment infallible." For a moment, only the heaters spoke. Then a vehicle approached outside. The diesel engine labored up the service road, coughed once, and stopped. Several dogs began barking. One retreated to the back of her kennel, another spun in place. Mercer turned toward the warehouse door. Dale's face hardened. He was told not to come. The side door opened. The man who stepped inside was in his mid-40s, tall enough to seem awkward in the low doorway and narrow through the shoulders. He wore a gray hoodie beneath an orange work jacket with reflective strips across the sleeves. His dark blonde hair had been cut unevenly around the ears, and the patchy beard shadowed his long jaw. He saw Marisol first, then Nolan, then Gideon and Mercer. His body seemed to shrink without actually moving. "Who are they?" he asked. Dale's answer came flat. "People you should have expected eventually." The man's eyes moved toward the kennels. "I brought feed." "This is Grant Veller," Dale said. "Volunteer." Grant set a sack of food near the door. His right sleeve carried a torn reflective strip. Tessa noticed it at the same moment Gideon did. She did not approach immediately. Instead, she took out her phone and opened the photograph of the orange material recovered near Frostglass Ridge. Grant saw what she was looking at. "This jacket?" he said quickly. "Everybody who works road crews has one." "No one asked you about it," Tessa said. His mouth remained open for half a second. Then he looked at Dale. Dale did not help him. Grant moved toward a kennel near the rear, lifted a scoop and began filling a bowl. His hands shook enough that dry food scattered across the floor. The dog inside, a tan shepherd mix with one cloudy eye, stayed in the back corner. Grant clicked his tongue. When the dog did not move, he took a small black whistle from beneath his hoodie and blew 2 short notes. Mercer rose. The reaction was subtle but immediate. His body moved in front of Gideon's knees, not aggressively, simply creating a line. Rowan's attention sharpened. "Do that again," she said. Grant turned. "What?" "The whistle." "Why? Do it again." Marisol raised one hand. "He does not have to perform for us." Rowan nodded once. Then she looked at Gideon. I heard that pattern in the overnight video. Gideon understood. Morrow had panicked when a training clip from another room played over the clinic monitor. At the time, Rowan had assumed it was the electronic tone, the metal door, or the sudden volume. Grant tucked the whistle back beneath his hoodie. Lots of people use two-note recall. Correct, Marisol said. Which is why a dog's response to it proves nothing by itself. Grant seemed relieved too quickly. Tessa stepped closer to his sleeve. May I photograph the damage? No. That is your right. Grant folded his arm against his body. The tear happened loading fence posts. When? I don't remember. Recent? Maybe. Marisol moved between them. We are not treating fabric similarity as proof. We will request access to relevant vehicle records and communication data through proper channels. Grant's face changed. Not dramatically, just enough. Gideon had seen that look before in men waiting for a structure to collapse after hearing the first bean crack. Marisol studied him. Were you involved in transporting dogs near Frostglass Ridge 4 nights ago? No. The answer came before she finished the question. Dale closed his eyes. Marisol's tone remained neutral. Were you in the area? No. Did you operate the North Pass transport vehicle? No. Tessa glanced toward the diesel truck outside. Whose vehicle is that? Mine. Same one used for feed runs? Yes. Same one equipped with the old GPS unit mounted under the dash? Grant's gaze snapped toward her. Tessa had noticed the device through the windshield before entering. It barely works, he said. Does it store trip history? No idea. Dale spoke at last. Grant, the younger man turned on him. What? Stop. Grant's face flushed. I did not go near the cliff. No one had mentioned a cliff. The warehouse became still. Even the dogs seemed to sense the shift. Marisol did not seize on the mistake. She wrote something on her clipboard. Mr. Veller, we will not continue questioning you without making your rights and status clear. You are not under arrest. You may refuse consent to searches. You may also obtain counsel. Grant looked almost offended by the formality. I didn't do anything. Marisol nodded. Then accurate records will help establish that. Dale moved toward the office corner and opened a drawer. Inside were transport logs, fuel receipts, and a ring of old vehicle keys. The paperwork was incomplete, but not empty. We had a transfer 4 nights ago, he said. Grant stared at him. Dale continued before fear could stop him. Dogs from a breeding operation closure near Bonner's Ferry. 7 animals. We moved them after dark. Why after dark? Nolan asked. Because I did not want the county to see the destination. Marisol wrote without looking up. What happened during transport? The truck failed near Frostglass Access Road. We called another vehicle. During transfer, one rear door opened before the dogs were secured. Who opened it? Dale looked at Grant. Grant looked away. 3 dogs escaped, Dale said. We recovered 2. And the third? Grant said it ran north into the timber. Grant's breathing changed. Gideon heard it even over the heaters. Marisol asked, Did you report the animal missing? No. Why? Dale's voice lowered. Because I knew what would happen if you found this place. And what did happen to the dog? We searched. How long? Until morning, then in shifts for 2 more days. Using which people? Volunteers. Without notifying rangers, shelters, veterinary clinics, or the public? Yes. Marisol looked toward the 11 kennels. You protected this operation by reducing the chance that anyone could find a starving dog in winter. Dale's hand tightened around the keys. I believed he was running. Gideon looked at Grant. You told him that. Grant's head turned sharply. I told him what I saw. What did you see? Trees, snow, the dog moving fast. Near the ridge? I said I wasn't there. You said you never went near the cliff. Grant's jaw worked. Gideon felt Mercer's body against his shin, steady and warm. The old dog was not urging him forward. He was keeping him still. Tessa went outside with Nolan to inspect the transport vehicle. Dale remained beside Marisol. Rowan continued treating the coughing dog, though Gideon noticed she was listening to every word. Grant stood near the feed sack, arms folded. He looked neither violent nor cold. He looked trapped by his own sequence of answers. 20 minutes later, Tessa returned carrying the removable GPS unit in a clear bag. Dale consented to release the company equipment, she said. Grant's face drained. The unit still has power. Nolan found stored route history. Marisol looked at her. What does it show? Vehicle stopped near the Frostglass turnout at 8:42 p.m. It remained there for 1 hour and 12 minutes. Dale frowned. You told me 40 minutes. Grant said nothing. Tessa continued. The statement you gave Dale places you away from the ridge after 9. That system drifts. By distance, possibly, not by 40 minutes. I was searching. Then why lie about being there? Grant looked at the warehouse door. For 1 second, Gideon thought he might run. Instead, he stood completely still. The whistle cord at his neck moved with each breath. Marisol did not press him further. We will preserve the device and request the records properly. Mr. Veller, I recommend you speak with counsel before making another statement. Grant's eyes found Gideon. There was resentment in them. And fear. But not the hard vacancy Gideon had expected to see in the person who might have left Morrow beneath the ice. That was what unsettled him most. Cruelty would have been simpler. Cruelty could be named, opposed, and removed. Grant looked like a man who had made one frightened decision, then another, then built a narrow hallway of lies and kept walking, because turning around meant seeing what he had abandoned behind him. He was not innocent. Gideon felt certain of that. But he was not fearless enough to be a monster either. He was something more ordinary. A man delaying the moment when the truth would finally catch up. And ordinary fear, Gideon knew, could leave living things in the cold just as surely as hatred could. The order went into effect before noon. No dogs were to leave the old Forest Service nursery, no new animals were to arrive, no medication was to be administered without Rowan's approval, and no transport crate was to be loaded until Marisol Keene had reviewed the condition of the dog assigned to it. Dale read the order twice beneath the warehouse lights. The paper shook slightly in his hand. You are freezing the place in the middle of winter, he said. I am freezing movement, Marisol replied, not care. She stood beside the folding table they had turned into a temporary workstation, her dark field coat still buttoned and her tortoise-shell glasses low on her nose. Around them the 11 dogs settled and stirred in uneven rhythms. A shepherd scratched at the blanket. The old Labrador breathed in soft, wet sighs. Somewhere near the rear wall, the cattle dog's identification tag tapped against a bowl. Marisol placed a second document beside the first. I am requesting a 30-day in-place care order. If the court approves it, the dogs remain here temporarily under outside supervision. Dale looked up sharply. You are not taking them? Not today. Relief crossed his face, but only for a second. You will not retain authority over intake, transport, placement, or medical decisions, she continued. A licensed rescue organization will assume temporary legal responsibility. Rowan will oversee health assessments. Dale's relief collapsed into something more wounded. You want me to stay and clean kennels while strangers decide which dogs belong where. I want the animals protected while we determine what happens next. They know me. That is not the same as belonging to you. The sentence landed harder than Marisol raised her voice. Dale turned toward the kennel rows. His fingers found the ring of keys at his belt. Gideon watched from near the side door with Mercer beside him. The old shepherd had spent most of the morning lying on a rubber mat, conserving his right shoulder. His eyes followed movement without urgency. Unlike the people in the room, Mercer appeared to understand that stillness did not mean nothing was happening. A dark sedan arrived shortly after 1. The man who stepped out carried a reddish-brown leather document case and wore a charcoal wool coat over a chestnut vest. He was small-framed, upright, and balding high across the forehead, with thin white hair around the sides and round wire glasses that made his brown eyes seem brighter than the winter day deserved. Owen Sutter entered the warehouse, stamped snow from polished black shoes, and looked once down each kennel row. 11, he said. Dale did not greet him. Owen placed his case on the folding table and opened it. The interior was divided into labeled sections, each arranged by date. You counted before saying hello, Dale said. I learned to count before trusting you. Rowan, kneeling beside the elderly Labrador, closed her eyes briefly. Marisol asked, You know each other. Owen helped shut North Pass down, Dale said. Owen removed a packet of forms. I helped prevent a damaged building from holding more animals than it could safely house. You signed the order. I signed the recommendation. Same result. No. Results are what happen after recommendations are ignored. Dale stepped closer. You came once. You saw kennels, violations, and numbers. You did not see a 14-year-old dog rejected by 4 shelters because it would die before anyone adopted it. Owen's expression remained controlled. I saw one man deciding that because other systems failed, he no longer needed one. They would have killed them. Some might have been euthanized. You say that like the grammar makes it cleaner. Owen removed his glasses, wiped them, and put them back on. No. I say it accurately because accuracy matters when people are making decisions for creatures that cannot appeal. The argument did not rise into shouting. That made it sharper. Dale believed every animal in the warehouse represented a life saved from a colder system. Owen believed every undocumented choice made the dogs dependent on one man's judgment, fatigue, and fear. Both were right often enough to make the conflict dangerous. Rowan moved between kennels with a tablet and her dark red fountain pen. She examined each dog separately, refusing to let the larger argument flatten them into a group. The old Labrador, Ruthie, could not tolerate a long transport without pain management and support. Mabel, the Mastiff mix, needed a foster experienced with defensive behavior. The cattle dog required seizure monitoring and a crate modified to prevent injury. 2 dogs had healthy enough bodies to transfer within days. 3 needed blood work. 1 had no complete source record at all. By late afternoon, the warehouse walls were covered with temporary status cards. Move when stable. Remain in place. Behavioral assessment required. Medical hold. Dale stood beneath them as though watching pieces of his own life being assigned destinations. You make it look orderly, he told Owen. That is the point. It does not feel orderly to them. Owen glanced toward the dogs. No. But confusion should not become policy just because animals cannot complain in words. At the clinic in Brightwater, Morrow managed 6 steps. Gideon arrived near dusk with Mercer and found Rowan's veterinary technician supporting the dog with a wide gray sling beneath his abdomen. Morrow's legs trembled. The injured rear foot touched the floor, lifted, then touched again. Mercer waited several feet away. Morrow saw him. His ears shifted forward, his breathing slowed. He took one more step. Then the sling tightened slightly as the technician adjusted her grip. Morrow panicked. He twisted, hit the padded barrier, and snapped at empty air. The technician immediately loosened the strap and moved sideways rather than pulling back. Mercer rose but did not approach. Morrow froze, chest heaving. Gideon felt anger move through him with unreasonable speed. Not at the technician. At Grant. At the whistle. The cut leash, the false statement, the extra 40 minutes hidden inside a GPS record. At a man who had returned to warmth while Morrow scraped his nails against frozen stone. "He knows what happened," Gideon said. Rowan had entered behind him without sound. "Probably. And he is still making everyone prove it. That is what frightened people do when truth has a cost." Gideon turned. "Do not make him sound helpless." "I did not." "He left a dog to die." "Yes." "And Dale built the whole system that taught him keeping the place hidden mattered more than calling for help." "Yes." Her agreement gave him nowhere to push. Morrow had lowered himself onto the blanket. Mercer lay near the doorway, body turned partly away. Gideon watched the two dogs. One of them nearly died because a grown man was afraid of being blamed. Rowan folded her arms. That sentence is not only about Grant. The room seemed to narrow. Gideon's voice dropped. "Do not. You are angry enough to hurt him. I have not touched him. That is not what I said." Rowan moved toward the treatment counter and placed her red pen beside the chart. "You want Grant to confess because Morrow deserves the truth. That part is clean. You also want him punished in a way that reaches backward and changes something else." Gideon looked toward the window. Snow had begun gathering on the exterior ledge. "Caleb called me at 6:12, he said. The words emerged before he decided to speak them. Rowan did not interrupt. His rescue truck had gone off the Hollow Creek Road. He had a civilian with him. Crushed leg, heavy bleeding. Mercer lifted his head. "Caleb told me not to rush. Said he had it mostly handled. The county plow had not cleared the upper road, and I thought—" Gideon stopped. He had repeated the official sequence many times in his head: road conditions, visibility, equipment limitations, response protocol. None of it answered the only question that mattered. "I thought he was Caleb," he said. "I thought being capable meant he could wait." Rowan's face softened without becoming gentle. "How long?" 23 minutes before I left." Morrow shifted on the blanket. Gideon kept his eyes on the floor. "When I reached them, the civilian was alive. Caleb had used his own belt as a tourniquet. He kept the man warm with his coat." "And Caleb?" "Lost too much blood from a wound under his ribs. He knew it. He did not say." Gideon's hand closed around the edge of the counter. "I spent 2 years telling myself he sounded calm, that the plow was safer, that a reasonable man would have waited." Mercer crossed the room. He did not press against Gideon or demand attention. He simply sat beside his boot. Gideon rested one hand on the shepherd's head. "He called," Gideon said. "I heard him. And I decided there was time." The admission did not relieve him. It made the room more honest. Rowan picked up the red pen again. "Grant is responsible for what he did." "I know. He is not responsible for what you did." Gideon looked at her. "I know that too." "No, you understand it. That is not the same as knowing it when you look at him." The following morning, Marisol obtained consent to preserve data from Dale's old work phone and the nursery's transport records. Grant retained an attorney and stopped answering informal questions. For several hours, nothing changed. Then, a deleted message recovery from Dale's phone produced one line sent the night Morrow disappeared. "I heard him but couldn't get down. I'm coming back." Dale read the recovered text at the warehouse table. His face went gray. "He never came back," Marisol said. Dale placed both hands flat on the table. "I told him not to take risks alone." "That is not what the message says. He was supposed to search the tree line, not climb. He heard the dog. Dale closed his eyes. I made them afraid to call anyone. Owen stood across from him, document case open. You made secrecy the condition of belonging. Dale's jaw tightened. They knew why. Yes, Owen said. That is how systems become dangerous. Everyone knows why until nobody asks what it costs. Dale looked toward the kennel rows. I will take responsibility. Marisol's gaze hardened. For what you did? Yes. For Grant? No. He was following my rules. He made his own choice after the fall. You do not know that. We are about to. Grant arrived with his attorney shortly after 3. He no longer wore the orange work jacket. In a plain gray coat, he looked narrower and more exposed. The black whistle was still around his neck, partly hidden beneath the collar. They met in the nursery's small office with Marisol, Nolan, Grant's attorney, and Owen present. Gideon was not part of the interview, but Grant requested to speak with him afterward. The statement lasted more than an hour. When Grant emerged, his face looked bloodless. Dale stood first. Grant did not look at him. I found the dog near the ridge, he said. No one answered. He would not let me close. Every time I moved, he ran toward the rocks. I used the whistle. He stopped, then turned on me when I clipped the lead. His hand drifted toward his right wrist, where a faded bite scar crossed the skin. He pulled. I wrapped the line around my hand. It caught on a rock. Grant's breathing became shallow. I thought he was going to drag me over. I cut it. Gideon saw the moment without wanting to. The blade, the tension released, the line disappearing over the edge. Grant stared at the floor. I heard him hit. Dale made a broken sound. Grant continued. I crawled close enough to look. I could not see him. Then I heard him whining. How long did you stay? Gideon asked. Grant shook his head. I do not know. You know. Maybe 3 minutes? 5? And then? I left. The warehouse heaters hummed. Grant finally looked at Gideon. I told myself I could get Dale. Then I thought if Dale knew, he would call the county. They would find the nursery. The dogs would be taken. I thought Morrow might climb out. I thought maybe he had landed on another trail. You heard him, Gideon said. Yes. And you left. Yes. Dale stepped forward. This is mine. I taught him. Gideon turned on him. You taught him to hide. You did not move his feet away from that ridge. Dale stopped. Grant removed the whistle from his neck. He placed it on the office desk. I will take you back, he said. I will show you exactly where I stood. Gideon wanted to strike him. The impulse came clean and fast. Mercer rose from beside the wall and placed one front paw over Gideon's boot. The familiar weight held him there. Gideon looked down, then back at Grant. I am not going to call you a monster, he said. Grant's expression twisted, almost as if the word would have been easier. And I am not going to forgive you because you are afraid now. Grant lowered his eyes. The worst thing you did was not cutting the leash. You believed you were about to fall. Fear explains that moment. Gideon stepped closer, stopping beyond arm's reach. The worst thing was hearing him alive and deciding your silence mattered more. Grant's shoulders folded inward. No one rescued him from the sentence. After several seconds, he nodded. I understand. No, Gideon said. You are beginning to. Outside, winter light faded behind the greenhouse panels. Inside, 11 dogs shifted in their kennels, while adults finally named the cost of protecting them badly. Grant signed the agreement to return to Frostglass Ridge under supervision and provide a complete recorded account. The truth had not repaired anything. Morrow still feared tension on a leash. Dale still faced losing control of the animals that had defined his life. Grant still had legal consequences ahead, and Gideon still carried 23 minutes no confession could return. But for the first time since the Ridge, no one in the room was pretending kindness made responsibility disappear. The forecast gave them 6 clear hours. Tessa Rourke trusted forecasts the way she trusted old rope: useful, necessary, and never beyond inspection. At 8 that morning, she stood beside the Frostglass trailhead with a tablet in one hand and her amber-lensed goggles pushed onto her copper-knit cap. The sky was pale blue. Sunlight lay clean across the snow. Wind moved lightly through the upper pines, not yet strong enough to carry loose powder from the branches. "Pressure is falling faster than predicted," she said. "We document the site, confirm Grant's account, and leave before 2. Grant stood near Marisol's vehicle wearing a plain gray winter shell instead of the orange work jacket now held as evidence. His attorney had approved the supervised site visit and waited in town, reachable by satellite call. Grant's face looked sharper in the cold, his narrow jaw tight and his dark blonde hair hidden beneath a green cap. He carried no whistle. Marisol checked the recording equipment attached to her field coat. Nolan unfolded the land map over the hood of his ranger vehicle, weighting one corner with his silver mechanical pencil. Gideon clipped Mercer into the charcoal rescue harness. The shepherd shifted as the strap passed over his right shoulder. Gideon stopped. "You tell me when." Mercer looked toward the trail. "That is not an answer." Tessa glanced over. "He gets 1 hour at the site, less if the shoulder changes." Mercer's tilted ear moved toward her voice. "You heard the boss," Gideon said. Tessa pointed at herself. "Make sure he understands which one." No one laughed much, but the remark loosened the air enough to breathe. Morrow remained at Rowan's clinic in Brightwater. That morning he had eaten another controlled meal and stood for almost 4 minutes with the support sling. Rowan had sent a photograph of him asleep with one front paw resting across the edge of Mercer's old towel. Gideon had shown the picture to Mercer before they left. The dog had smelled the screen and turned away, either satisfied or unimpressed. They began the ascent at 8:30. Tessa led. Nolan marked coordinates and photographed the changing trail conditions. Marisol remained beside Grant, asking him to describe the route in his own words before landmarks became visible. Gideon stayed behind them with Mercer. Grant's pace changed whenever the trail narrowed. His steps shortened. His eyes began measuring the drop to the west even before the fracture appeared through the trees. "You came this way from the service road?" Marisol asked. "Yes." "Alone?" "Yes." "Where was your vehicle?" "Turnout below the ridge." "How long did you search before locating the dog?" Grant swallowed. "Maybe 20 minutes." Marisol did not challenge him. The recorder captured the answer and the sound of their boots in snow. At the ridge, Tessa stopped everyone before the edge. The fracture looked smaller in daylight than Gideon remembered. That disturbed him. From above, it was only a dark seam among rock and brush. A place ordinary enough to disappear from a person's conscience once they walked away. Tessa established a safety line. Nolan marked the precise recovery coordinates. Gideon identified the tree he had used for the second anchor and the section of stone where the rescue rope had crossed. Grant stood several yards back. Marisol faced him. "Begin where you first saw Morrow." Grant pointed toward a stand of young firs. "He came through there, lead dragging behind him. I used the whistle and he stopped near that rock." "Show us without approaching the edge." He walked to a flat section of snow and indicated where he had clipped the line.
He turned when I reached for the collar, bit my wrist. I pulled back. He pulled harder. What kind of leash? Red nylon, 6 feet, metal snap. Tessa photographed the position.
Grant continued toward the fracture until she raised a gloved hand. "Stop there." He froze. "That is where the line caught," he said. "Around the stone near my left boot." His voice had become thin. "I wrapped it around my hand." He went toward the edge. I thought the leash would take me with him. "What did you use to cut it?" Marisol asked. "Folding knife, partially serrated." "Which hand?" "Right." "And after the leash was cut?" "He disappeared." Grant looked toward the fracture but did not move closer. "There is a hollow below the main ledge," he said. "A narrow space under an overhang. I could not see him at first because he had fallen into it." Gideon looked at Tessa. That hollow had not appeared in any public report or photograph. It was visible only from the lower angle where Gideon had stabilized Morrow. Tessa's expression tightened. "Describe it." "Rock shelf on the left, ice along the back wall, a dead branch caught across the opening." The details were accurate. Not proof of every word, enough to show Grant had looked down. Tessa clipped into the line and approached the edge. Using a pole camera, she examined the crack where Grant said the leash had caught. Something flashed beneath a crust of ice. She cleared it carefully with the tip of a tool and recovered a bent metal snap lodged between 2 rocks. A short piece of red nylon remained attached. Grant stared at it. "That is it." Marisol sealed the object in an evidence pouch. Tessa studied the exposed end of the nylon. "The cut is angled and partly frayed, consistent with a serrated blade under tension." "Does that prove his account?" Nolan asked. "It supports part of it. It does not tell us what he did afterward." Grant lowered his head. No one needed to explain that the afterward was the reason they had come. By 11:40, the documentation was complete. The weather had begun changing. It did not arrive like a storm announcing itself over the horizon. The blue sky remained visible above the eastern trees, but wind shifted downslope, colder and sharper, lifting ribbons of snow from the ridge. Tessa checked the handheld meter. "We leave now." Nolan looked up. "Forecast gave us another 2 hours." "The forecast is not standing here." She ordered the equipment packed without debate. They descended quickly, but not carelessly. Mercer moved near Gideon, his right stride still even. Grant carried one of the light cases. Marisol remained behind Tessa. 20 minutes later, a gust moved through the timber with the sound of a distant train. Snow came sideways. Visibility fell from several hundred yards to less than 50. Tessa stopped the group beneath a rock shelf. "Localized squall," she said. "We continue to the vehicles. No shortcuts." The next gust brought down the tree. They heard the crack before they saw it. A pine struck the service road ahead, branches exploding into powder and blocking the narrow passage between the slope and a stand of dense timber. Nolan moved forward to assess the left side. "Stay on the road," Tessa called. He raised one hand in acknowledgement. Then the snow beneath him broke. It was not an avalanche, only a shallow shelf over a drainage ditch, hidden by wind-packed powder. Nolan dropped waist-deep, twisted and slid 6 feet down the embankment before striking a buried log. His shout ended in a hard breath. Gideon reached him first but stopped above the slope. "Nolan, do not move." "My leg disagrees." The ranger's face had gone pale beneath his mustache. His left boot pointed at an angle that was not immediately catastrophic, but far from reassuring. Tessa secured a line around a tree and descended beside him. "Pulse is present," she said after checking the foot. "Possible fracture. We cannot carry him through that roadblock in this visibility." Nolan leaned his head back into the snow. "I always wanted to become inconvenient professionally." Tessa consulted the map. There is an old patrol cabin northeast, less than half a mile. Maintained? Marisol asked. No. Visible? Not in this. They built a temporary splint before moving. Grant stood several feet away, staring at Nolan. Gideon saw something happen in his face. Not panic exactly, but recognition. An injured living body. A worsening sky. The pressure of other people waiting for someone to decide. Tessa divided the group. I go ahead with Marisol and locate the cabin. Gideon stays with Nolan. Grant carries insulation and assists with the drag litter. Grant looked toward the obscured road. You want me here? I want everyone where they are useful. That answer gave him no moral importance, only work. It seemed to steady him. Tessa and Marisol disappeared into the snow. Gideon kept one hand near Nolan's shoulder while Grant unfolded the insulated litter. Mercer stood facing the direction Tessa had gone, nose raised. Minutes passed. The wind erased their tracks almost as soon as they formed. Then Mercer turned away from the route Tessa had taken. He pulled lightly toward a low cluster of snow-covered brush. Gideon held the leash. No search. Mercer sniffed the air again, then pawed once at the drift. Beneath the snow, something dark appeared. Wood. Gideon cleared the top edge with his glove. It was the corner of a buried porch rail. Tessa, he called through the radio. Her answer came broken by static. Say again? Mercer found structure, 20 yards east of our position. Tessa returned with Marisol and confirmed the location. The patrol cabin stood lower than the map suggested, half hidden by drifting snow and young fir growth. Mercer had not led them through the storm. He had found the final 20 feet. Tessa cleared the door. Gideon and Grant moved Nolan inside. The cabin held 2 bunks, an iron stove, a rough table, and a supply shelf containing dry firewood sealed in an old metal box. No electricity, no reliable radio signal. Enough shelter. Grant knelt beside Nolan while Gideon finished the splint. Hold his knee steady. Grant did. Not that hard. He loosened his grip immediately. Nolan opened one eye. You always this obedient? Not historically. That explains today. They wrapped Nolan in insulated blankets and started the stove. Tessa and Marisol went outside to raise the satellite antenna beyond the tree cover. Grant could have gone with them. He looked toward the door, then back at Nolan. I'll stay. No one praised him. Gideon handed him the medical checklist. Check his circulation every 10 minutes. Grant nodded. The temperature inside rose slowly. During the move, one medical pouch had slipped from the litter near the cabin. It contained additional pain medication and chemical heat packs. Gideon realized it was missing only after Nolan's discomfort began worsening. I'll go, Grant said. No, Tessa replied over the radio. No one searches alone. Mercer rose. Gideon saw the stiffness in his right shoulder. The pouch was probably no more than 30 yards from the cabin. Mercer could search a narrow corridor under line control. Gideon clipped on the lead. One pass. Outside, the wind pushed hard against them. Mercer worked close, nose low, following the disturbed scent trail left by the litter. Within minutes, he found the pouch beneath the tip of a fallen branch. He picked it up, then stopped. His front right leg trembled. Gideon took the pouch and crouched. That is enough. Mercer tried to step forward. No. The shepherd looked toward the cabin. Gideon slipped an arm beneath the harness handle and supported part of his weight. For years, Gideon had trusted Mercer because the dog always returned. He had rarely asked what returning cost him. Inside the cabin, Gideon removed the harness and wrapped Mercer's shoulder in a warming pad. The dog resisted lying down until Nolan had received medication and Grant resumed the circulation checks. Only then did Mercer settle near the stove. Gideon sat beside him. The black and gold coat looked thinner around the shoulders than it had the previous winter. "You are not required to be useful every minute," Gideon murmured. Mercer closed his eyes. Across the cabin, Grant had heard. "So what are we required to be?" he asked. Gideon looked at him. Present. Night came early beneath the squall. Tessa established intermittent contact with the rescue base. A team would reach them after first light unless conditions improved sooner. Nolan remained stable. The cabin warmed enough for ice to begin melting from the hems of their coats. Grant sat on the floor near Nolan's bunk. "I kept making versions," he said eventually. No one asked what he meant. "After Morrow fell, I told myself he might climb out. Then that he might have landed on a lower trail. Then that someone else might come." He rubbed both hands over his face. "Every version bought me another minute." Gideon fed a piece of wood into the stove. "I did the same with Caleb." Grant looked over. "I know you told Rowan." "She did not tell you." "No. Dale heard you say something at the warehouse. He guessed the rest." Gideon watched the fire catch. "I told myself Caleb had handled worse. That waiting for the plow was reasonable. That he would call again if it became serious." "Did he?" "No." Grant lowered his eyes. "I heard Morrow again after I walked away." The cabin went quiet. "How far?" Gideon asked. "Maybe 50 yards. Wind carried it." "And you kept going?" "Yes." Nolan shifted beneath the blankets but did not open his eyes. Grant's voice broke at the edges. "I do not know what kind of man hears that and keeps walking." Gideon looked toward Mercer asleep by the stove. "The kind who spends too much time naming himself and not enough time turning around." Grant absorbed that. "Are you saying I can fix it?" "No." The answer was immediate. "You cannot give him back those hours. I cannot give Caleb back 23 minutes. Gideon glanced at Nolan. "But there is a man on that bunk who needed somebody to stay." Grant followed his gaze. "That does not erase anything." "No." "Then what does it do?" "It prevents one more thing from being added." They sat without speaking after that. No forgiveness passed between them. Only the practical work of checking Nolan's foot, feeding the stove, warming water, and keeping the injured man awake whenever his responses grew slow. By dawn, the wind had weakened. The rescue team reached the cabin shortly after 7. Nolan was transported by sled to the waiting vehicle. The others descended under Tessa's direction. Grant carried the medical pack all the way down. He did not mention it. Later that afternoon, with his attorney present, he signed the complete recorded statement and identified every point on the route. Dale delivered the remaining North Pass files to Owen and formally surrendered operational authority over the nursery during the court-supervised transition. Nothing became clean. Nolan still had a fractured fibula. Mercer would need rest and another examination of his shoulder. Morrow still woke frightened when a leash tightened. Grant still faced prosecution, and Dale still faced the consequences of building a rescue around secrecy. But on Frostglass Ridge, when another living being became injured and difficult to carry, no one walked away. This time, fear did not get the final decision. This time, no one was left behind. 3 months changed the shape of the story without making it simple. North Pass did not reopen. It did not receive a new sign, a cleaner logo, or a hopeful name printed over the same habits. The court-supervised care order ended only after every dog had been evaluated separately, each file reviewed by Rowan, Marisol, Owen, and the licensed rescue organization that had agreed to assume legal responsibility. Some dogs left the old nursery in quiet stages. 2 went to experienced foster homes equipped for medical care. 3 transferred to a regional rehabilitation center. The cattle dog with seizures moved into a climate-controlled foster placement where someone was present overnight. Mabel, the Mastiff mix who panicked when hands reached over her head, entered a long-term behavioral program. No one called it a fresh start. Her new handlers understood that progress might look like accepting food through a gate or remaining in the same room with a stranger. Ruthie, the elderly Labrador, stayed at the nursery with one other senior dog because Rowan believed transport would cause more harm than temporary residence under supervision. They were the last animals there. The place looked emptier each week. Dale Huxley was not allowed to decide who left, who stayed, what medicine was given, or which transport route was used. He had been prohibited from managing finances, accepting new animals, or arranging placements while the investigation continued. He came once to collect personal tools. Owen supervised. Dale moved through the warehouse slowly, the large ring of keys still hanging from his belt, even though most no longer opened anything he controlled. He stopped at Ruthie's kennel and stood beyond the marked boundary Rowan had established. The old Labrador raised her head. Dale's hand moved toward the latch, then stopped. Rowan had left a sign on the door. Authorized care staff only. Dale read it twice. "May I sit here?" he asked. Owen looked toward the supervising technician. She nodded. Dale lowered himself onto an overturned feed bucket outside the kennel. He did not open the door. He did not speak to Ruthie as though no one else could understand her. He simply sat. Gideon watched from the far end of the warehouse, where he was measuring the rear exit for a replacement frame. The moment did not redeem Dale. It did not return the dogs to him or erase the decisions that had put them at risk. But it was the first time Gideon had seen him remain close to an animal without assuming closeness gave him authority. That mattered. Not enough to settle the past, enough to mark a beginning. Grant's case moved more slowly. He had been charged with abandoning an injured animal and providing false information during the inquiry. His attorney negotiated community service while the final disposition remained pending. But the work did not place him near dogs. Instead, Grant spent cold mornings inventorying emergency equipment at county storage buildings, repainting trail markers, and clearing drainage grates along public access roads. Some people in Brightwater called that too lenient. Others called it pointless. Gideon considered both judgments too easy. Grant did not become admirable because he had stayed with Nolan in the cabin. He had done what should have been done the first time, remained when another living being depended on him. One correct decision could not buy back an abandoned one. But neither did accountability require pretending change was impossible. Nolan returned to desk duty with a walking boot, a cane he disliked, and an increased talent for complaining about chairs. He told anyone who asked that Grant had followed instructions during the storm. He also made it clear that cooperation did not cancel the charges. "Facts are not reward points," he told Gideon one afternoon. "You do not collect enough good ones to erase the bad ones." Gideon had repeated the sentence to Rowan. She had said, "That is almost intelligent." Almost? He remains Nolan. The licensed rescue project Owen was building existed mostly in folders. The proposed site sat outside Coeur d'Alene on land previously used for agricultural training. Plans had been submitted but not approved. Funding remained short. Staffing was theoretical. The county wanted revised drainage estimates, the insurer wanted stronger fencing, and Owen wanted every emergency protocol written before the first dog arrived. Gideon accepted a small contract to design transport anchoring points, a double-door isolation entrance, and a clear evacuation route from the medical wing. He refused to join the board. He refused to speak at a fundraiser. He refused to let Owen put his name in the project's summary. "What exactly are you willing to do?" Owen asked. "Build the parts that should not fail." Owen considered that. Annoyingly useful. Gideon used Caleb's folding wooden ruler to measure every frame. The burned edge caught on his glove whenever he opened it fully. The initials CR remained visible near the hinge. For the first time in 2 years, the ruler no longer felt like evidence against him. It was only a tool again. Not only a tool, but enough of one to be used. He postponed the sale of his cabin through winter. The real estate agent sent an updated agreement twice. Gideon left both envelopes unopened on the kitchen counter. He did not claim he would stay forever. Forever had become a word he distrusted. He chose spring. That was far enough. Morrow recovered unevenly. By the 3rd month, his ribs no longer showed through his coat. The dark fur along his back had regained a dull shine, and the pale, triangular patch on his chest stood out more clearly. He could walk through Rowan's clinic without the abdominal sling, though the left rear leg weakened after longer distances. His body healed faster than his expectations. A door remained dangerous if it closed too quickly. A leash became a threat when it tightened from behind. Diesel engines made him flatten his ears and search for the nearest wall. Rowan fostered him at her house because the clinic could not teach him what ordinary rooms felt like. Her home stood behind the practice, a low, cedar-sided building with a covered porch and a kitchen that always smelled faintly of coffee, antiseptic, and whatever soup she had forgotten on the stove. Mercer visited twice a week. He never tried to train Morrow. He crossed the front threshold and waited. At first, Morrow remained in the hall. Mercer would lie in the living room with his body turned away, choosing the warmest patch of floor without apology. Sometimes, Morrow watched for 20 minutes. Sometimes he disappeared into the back room. Eventually, he entered. Mercer ate while dishes clinked in the kitchen. Morrow learned that noise did not always announce danger. Mercer slept while Rowan opened and closed the front door. Morrow learned that every exit did not become abandonment. Mercer stepped over a soft green leash Rowan left coiled on the floor. Morrow began approaching it after everyone stopped watching. The first time his nose touched the fabric, Gideon was sitting at Rowan's table, pretending to read construction notes. He did not move. Neither did Rowan. Mercer opened one eye, then closed it again. Morrow stepped back. The next visit, he touched the leash twice. On the 4th visit, he placed one paw beside it and remained there long enough for his breathing to settle. No one congratulated him. The absence of celebration seemed to help. Mercer was changing too. He slept longer after those visits. The right shoulder stiffened whenever the temperature dropped. On stairs, he paused before descending and looked toward Gideon without embarrassment. Months earlier, Gideon would have encouraged him forward. "Come on, you've got it." Now Gideon moved beside him and placed one hand beneath the harness handle. No command, no performance, only support. One night, Mercer stopped halfway up the cabin steps. Gideon crouched beside him. The shepherd's amber eyes remained alert, but fatigue had softened the muscles around them. Gray had spread farther across his muzzle. The scar on his nose appeared brighter against the pale fur. "You do not have to prove anything," Gideon said. Mercer looked toward the door. "I know, I am slow." Gideon supported his right side. Together they climbed. The realization hurt differently than Caleb's death. Caleb had been gone all at once, leaving absence where a person had stood. Mercer was still here, asking Gideon to notice each smaller change. There was mercy in that. There was also responsibility. By late February, Tessa received approval to install a satellite emergency call box near the lower Frostglass Trail and a warning sign marking unstable terrain beyond the maintained route. Gideon built the mounting frame. The day they installed it was bright and nearly windless. Snow covered the lower slope in smooth, white layers, while the sky above the ridge carried the deep blue that appeared only after several clear, cold nights. They did not go near the fracture. The chosen location stood in a broad clearing below the steep terrain, visible from the main trail and accessible without climbing. Tessa unloaded tools from her rescue vehicle. "You checked the frame?" "3 times." "Only 3? I was trying to become reckless." She examined the bolts. "I will note your decline." Rowan arrived later with Morrow. The dog stepped from her wagon wearing a soft brown collar and a loose green leash. Rowan held the end without tension. Morrow's body remained low, but he did not retreat into the vehicle. Mercer stood beside Gideon, his left ear tilted toward Morrow. The younger dog looked across the snow. The ridge was visible through the trees. Wind passed between exposed stones higher on the slope and produced a low, hollow sound. Morrow stopped. Every muscle tightened. His rear leg shifted beneath him. His breathing quickened. The leash remained loose in Rowan's hand. "No closer," Rowan said. Tessa nodded. "We can finish without him." Morrow looked toward the vehicle, then toward Mercer. Gideon expected Mercer to approach. He did not. The old shepherd walked only far enough to stand several feet away, facing the same direction as Morrow. He did not touch him, block him, or turn the moment into a lesson. He simply stayed. Gideon returned to the frame. He drove the final bolt into the frozen ground, checked the emergency beacon, and mounted the warning sign beneath it. Unstable rock and concealed drop-offs beyond this point. Below the printed warning, Tessa had added a smaller line. "Report lost or injured animals immediately. Do not attempt unsupervised descent." Gideon stepped back. The sign did not make the mountain safe. It did not erase the ledge. It only gave the next person fewer excuses to walk away. When the work was finished, Rowan handed Gideon the green leash. Morrow saw the movement, his head lifted. Gideon took the loop but did not shorten it. He stood sideways instead of facing the dog directly. Morrow backed away 1 step. The leash remained slack between them. Gideon lowered the end onto the snow. Then he stepped back. No one spoke. Tessa busied herself packing tools. Rowan looked toward the trees. Mercer remained near Morrow, his body relaxed, gaze turned toward the open clearing. The wind moved lightly across the snow. Morrow approached the leash. He stopped before touching it. His nose worked. One front paw lifted, hovered, then returned to the ground. He retreated 2 steps. Gideon kept his hand open. There was no command to obey, no whistle, no tightening line, nothing but space. Morrow returned. This time, he smelled the leash, then followed its length with his eyes until he found Gideon at the other end. Mercer shifted his weight. The younger shepherd moved closer to him first. Their shoulders did not touch, but the space between them narrowed. Morrow stood there for several breaths. Then he stepped past Mercer, 1 pace, another. His left rear foot dragged slightly through the snow. Gideon did not crouch. He had learned that lowering himself too quickly could make kindness feel like pursuit. Morrow stopped within reach. The leash still lay loose between them. Gideon opened his palm. The dog's eyes moved from the hand to his face. One was deep brown. The other held the faint amber ring Rowan had noticed on the first night. Morrow leaned forward. His nose touched Gideon's fingers. Then his muzzle settled into the center of Gideon's palm. The contact was light, entirely chosen. Gideon did not close his hand around him. Behind Morrow, Mercer watched with 1 ear straight and 1 tilted outward. The old dog's tail moved once across the snow. Gideon looked at him and understood something he had mistaken for strength most of his life. Loyalty was not holding a person, a dog, or a memory so tightly that leaving became impossible. It was not forcing usefulness from an aging body. It was not hiding mistakes in the name of protecting something precious. Sometimes loyalty was quieter. Sometimes it meant building a door and leaving it open. Sometimes it meant holding the leash without pulling. Sometimes it meant creating enough safety that another living being could decide, freely, to come closer. Morrow remained beneath Gideon's hand. The ridge stood beyond them, cold and unchanged. But no one was asking the mountain to change. The choice had happened here, in the open snow. And this time it belonged to Morrow. Sometimes the hardest truth is that good intentions do not excuse the harm we leave behind. Dale cared about the dogs. Grant was afraid. Gideon carried regret of his own. But healing only began when each person stopped hiding behind reasons and chose to take responsibility for what came next. In our own lives, we may not be able to undo every mistake. We can still turn back, tell the truth, stay when someone needs us, and refuse to add one more wound to the past. Grace does not erase responsibility. It gives us the strength to face it. May God give you courage to make the next right choice even when it costs you comfort. If this story spoke to you, share your thoughts in the comments and tell us what Morrow's final choice meant to you. Subscribe for more stories about loyalty, courage, and the quiet decisions that change a life.